Her daughter-in-law changed her phone password without permission. The retired librarian didn't protest. The wife of her only son smiled, muted every alert, and took over her digital life one setting at a time. By the end of the week, the mother-in-law had locked her out of every account, revoked access to the estate, and filed a new will without a trace of shared control. She had raised a family. Now she was protecting herself from it. And when they came for what they believed they were owed, the documents were already in place, and they answered with silence. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The morning light in Sacramento came in soft and square, filtered through lace curtains Ruth Ellison had stitched herself 30 years ago. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, same place as always, and pressed the button. The screen blinked awake, demanding a passcode. She frowned, entered her usual 6 digits. Incorrect password. She tried again, slower this time. Incorrect password. Her chest tightened. The phone, her quiet lifeline, her calendar, her grocery lists, her daily Wordle streak, was suddenly off limits. Down the hallway, she could hear the sound of someone humming, cheerful, controlled. Tara. Ruth slipped into her robe and shuffled into the kitchen, where Tara stood at the counter, slicing strawberries with precision. Good morning, Tara chirped. Oh, I meant to tell you, I updated your password last night. Just a quick safety thing. Ruth blinked. You changed it? Tara smiled without looking up. Mm-hmm. You had your birthday as the code. That's like hacker kindergarten. I didn't ask you to. Oh, it's no big deal, Tara interrupted, waving the knife like a conductor's baton. You'll thank me. These scammers target older users all the time. Miles sat at the table, half hidden behind the newspaper, pretending to read. His coffee went untouched. Ruth looked at him, waiting. He looked back for a heartbeat, then dropped his eyes. I'd like the new password, please, Ruth said evenly. Tara rinsed her hands in the sink. Oh, I'll handle your calls and texts. It's easier that way. Less confusion. Confusion, Ruth repeated softly. Right. I linked your phone to our family plan, synced your contacts, disabled those pop-ups. You're all secure now. Ruth stared at the woman across from her. Perfect hair, pastel cardigan, the scent of some bright citrus perfume that always lingered too long after she left the room. Her tone was so polished, it felt rehearsed. I'd still like the password, Ruth said again, firmer this time. Tara finally looked up, her smile tightening. Oh, Ruth, you don't have to worry about all that tech stuff. I've got it covered. Miles folded his newspaper once, twice, as if that might make him invisible. The silence that followed was brittle. Even the fridge hum seemed to hold its breath. Ruth nodded once, very slowly. Thank you, she said. Her voice came out even, practiced. The same tone she used when calming an unruly student decades ago. I appreciate your help. Tara's smile brightened again, satisfied. Of course. Anything to keep you safe. Ruth turned, walked back to her bedroom, and closed the door behind her. She sat at her desk, the small wooden one her late husband had refinished, and pulled open the top drawer. Her notebook lay there, the same one where she kept her passwords, her budgets, her grocery lists, even the titles of every book she'd read since 1998. She uncapped her pen and wrote a single word on a fresh page. Invasion. Her hand didn't tremble. The act felt surgical. That afternoon, the house felt smaller. Tara laughed too loudly at the TV. Miles left for work early. Ruth made herself tea, but forgot the sugar. She moved slower, listened harder, to the subtle rearrangements of her world. By the time night came, she'd already unplugged the router and placed her laptop in a locked drawer. She wasn't sure yet what she'd do, but she knew this. Nothing in her life had been updated for safety. Something had been taken. The next morning, she walked down the cul-de-sac to Jenna Boyle's house, clutching her cardigan closed against the cool air. Jenna was out front watering her roses, wearing her usual sun visor and an expression that could cut glass. "Morning, Ruth," she called. "You look like you've been chewing on a lemon." Ruth stopped at the gate. "She changed my phone password." Jenna froze, hose still running. "What?" "Said it was for safety. She didn't give it back." Jenna turned off the hose with a sharp twist. "That woman touches one more cable in your house," she said, voice low and fierce. "I'm calling the police myself." Ruth smiled faintly. Not out of humor, but recognition. The kind you feel when someone finally sees what you've been quietly enduring. And for the first time in days, she felt something unfamiliar, but solid blooming beneath her calm. It wasn't anger yet. Not quite. It was the beginning of strategy. The library smelled the same as it had when Ruth worked there. Faint paper dust, lemon cleaner, and the hum of old air vents. It was a quiet smell, the kind that steadied her pulse. She hadn't come here in months, not since retirement had forced her to slow down. Now, walking past the circulation desk, she felt the quiet click of her sensible shoes on the tile like a metronome marking resolve. Allison Chen, the young reference librarian with sharp glasses and sharper intuition, noticed her instantly. "Mrs. Ellison, you're out early." Ruth smiled. Polite but contained. "Needed to use a computer. Mine's under maintenance." Allison tilted her head. "Pick any open station. The ones by the window have better Wi-Fi." Ruth took the one at the far end, away from the security cameras. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard, a relic skill from decades of cataloging. Then moved with deliberate precision. She opened her email login page, typed her username, then clicked Forgot Password. Security questions appeared, ones she'd written years ago. "What was your first pet's name? What's the title of your favorite book?" Her lips curved slightly. "Mr. Darcy," she whispered to the screen, "To Kill a Mockingbird." 2 steps later, she was in. Her inbox flooded open. Hundreds of unread emails, many notifications she hadn't seen in weeks. Password resets, family plan updates, bank access confirmations. Every digital echo of Tara's interference, stamped with exact timestamps. Her eyes sharpened. She opened a new tab and requested an Apple ID data download. The system offered her a full archive of text messages, call logs, and app permissions. She clicked Request All Data. A small banner confirmed, "Download ready in 24 hours." Behind her, a group of teenagers whispered over a graphic novel. Their laughter felt impossibly light compared to the pulse in Ruth's ears. She minimized every window, erased browsing history, cleared cache, habits ingrained in her bones. A hand rested on the back of her chair. "Doing okay?" Ruth turned. Allison had reappeared, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Just fine," Ruth said, forcing a small smile. Allison sat next to her, lowering her voice. "You know, Mrs. Ellison, I still remember your tech workshops. The seniors love them. You're the reason I even work with metadata." Ruth chuckled softly. "Seems I'm relearning my own lessons." Allison glanced at the screen, noticing the security alerts. Someone been poking around where they shouldn't? Ruth's expression didn't change, but her answer came measured. "Someone's been rearranging my world without permission." "Want me to help trace what was changed?" Allison asked. "Please." Together they went through recovery settings, linked devices, notification history. One by one, Allison pointed out small manipulations. Text alerts rerouted, notification previews turned off, backup email changed to an unfamiliar address ending in iCloud.com. "That's not mine," Ruth said. "Then whoever has it is monitoring you," Allison replied matter-of-factly. The librarian's calm, professional tone gave Ruth a strange sense of comfort, someone handling the truth without drama. She let out a slow breath. "Can you help me fix it?" Allison nodded. "Already did." Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. "I've restored your original contacts, and I'm setting your security keys to a flash drive. You'll need to keep this somewhere safe." Ruth accepted the small drive like a talisman. "You're very efficient." Allison smiled. Librarians never lose track of access. Ruth left soon after, stepping into the bright Sacramento afternoon. Her phone, still silent in her purse, buzzed once, but made no sound. She frowned. Tara had turned off all notification tones. Calls, texts, even alarms. The silence felt predatory. At the bus stop, Ruth sat down, clutching her purse against her lap. The city moved around her in easy, unbothered rhythm. Parents with strollers, teenagers on scooters, an old man feeding pigeons. But for Ruth, the world had shifted a few degrees colder. She took out her notebook, flipped past the word invasion, and wrote another beneath it. Pattern. Then, with deliberate slowness, she added a third. Proof. A gust of wind flipped the page half closed. She held it still, her fingers trembling slightly from adrenaline, not age. This wasn't about safety, she murmured to herself, voice low but fierce. It was access. The bus hissed to a stop beside her, brakes screeching like punctuation. Ruth looked up, eyes catching her reflection in the glass. Steady, unyielding, sharper than yesterday. She stood, stepped aboard, and found a seat by the window. In her purse, her muted phone lit up once more. Tara. "Everything okay, Ruth?" "Just checking in." Ruth didn't answer. She just watched the library disappear behind her and whispered under her breath, "Not for you to check anymore." The bus doors closed. The next move was hers. Ruth sat at her desk that evening, the flash drive from Allison resting beside her teacup like a small, gleaming piece of insurance. The sun had dipped low, throwing long amber bars across her notebook. Invasion, pattern, proof. 3 words that no longer felt abstract. They were coordinates. She opened her laptop, connected to the backup Allison helped her retrieve, and scrolled through the activity log. One entry snagged her attention. Account family plan modified. Authorized user, Tara Ellison. Her breath hitched. Family plan. Tara had folded her into her own cell service without consent. Every call, every message, every traceable ping now ran through her daughter-in-law's account. Ruth's eyes narrowed. "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." She moved through the recovery portal like a woman defusing a bomb. Calm, precise, methodical. She authenticated her Apple ID with the newly reset credentials Allison had built. Then she found the line item labeled Billing Owner, T. Ellison. With one click, she selected Remove Line. The system asked for confirmation. She gave it without hesitation. A notification flashed. Service removed. Device restored to individual account. The silence afterward was satisfying. Not peace, exactly, but a pause in which she could finally hear herself think. A soft knock startled her. Jenna's voice came from the porch. "You alive in there? Ruth? Or did you drown in passwords?" Ruth smiled faintly, setting her mug aside. "Come in, Jenna." Jenna shuffled inside wearing an oversized sweatshirt that read, "California Dreamin'," carrying 2 paper bags from the convenience store. "Brought us snacks and bad ideas." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Bad ideas?" "Burner phones." Jenna grinned, shaking one of the boxes like a secret. $50, prepaid, and nobody's business. Ruth couldn't help laughing. Short, quiet, startled by its own sound. "You're absurd." "I'm practical," Jenna corrected, tearing open the box. "You need something Tara can't sniff through. Something off the grid." They sat at the kitchen table while Jenna powered up the cheap phone, its screen glowing a dull blue. Ruth's old librarian instincts kicked in. Cataloging, labeling, order. She jotted the new number on an index card and tucked it inside her notebook behind proof. Jenna leaned back. "You're officially a spy now, Miss Librarian." Ruth smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. A spy keeps the record. Always. They both fell quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that comes only when two women have known each other through everything: marriages, funerals, the quiet indignities of aging. "Do you think she knows yet?" Jenna asked. "She will soon." Ruth began updating her online accounts, banking, utilities, even her email verification, shifting every two-factor authentication code to the burner phone. Each confirmation buzzed softly, a private pulse of victory. By the time she finished, the clock read 10:47 p.m. Jenna had dozed off in the chair, her head tilted back, soft snores filling the kitchen. Ruth looked at her friend with quiet gratitude before slipping outside to the porch. The night smelled of damp lawns and eucalyptus. Crickets hummed under the dim yellow of the streetlight. Ruth dialed her old phone, the one Tara had secured, just to see what would happen. The call failed. Number no longer in service. She smiled, a small, satisfied thing that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her new phone buzzed almost immediately. Unknown number. She opened the text. "Tara, did you mess with the settings?" Ruth stared at the words until they blurred. Then she placed the phone face down on the table, letting the screen light fade. Inside, Jenna stirred. "Everything okay?" Ruth took a long breath. Better than okay. She locked the door, switched off the porch light, and whispered to herself, "She's not the only one who can manage access." Her new phone buzzed again. The same number. Another message. "Tara, we need to talk." Ruth didn't reply. Instead, she turned the phone off entirely and tucked it into the inside pocket of her cardigan. For the first time in weeks, she felt the house breathe differently, lighter, emptier, hers again. But deep down, she knew Tara wasn't finished. And neither was she. The brass plaque outside the office read, "Thomas Reed, Attorney at Law." Neat serif letters. Understated, reliable. Ruth had chosen him years ago when she'd first drawn up her will, back when things were simple, back when trust felt like a given, not a liability. Now, she stepped through the glass door with a quiet authority that made the receptionist straighten in her chair. "Good morning, Mrs. Ellison," the young woman said. "Mr. Reed is ready for you." Thomas stood as Ruth entered his office. He looked almost exactly as she remembered, tall, trim, the same silver hair that always made him seem halfway between a professor and a judge. The corner of his mouth twitched into a half smile. "Well," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him, "it's been far too long since you've needed my services. I assume this isn't about book donations again." Ruth managed a small laugh as she sat. "No. This time, I'm here about edits." He adjusted his glasses, opening the file already pulled from his cabinet. "Your will, then. Everything's still valid, though it's been nearly a decade. Miles and Tara remain the primary beneficiaries, with the estate split evenly." "Not anymore," Ruth interrupted gently. Thomas's pen hovered above the page. "All right. What do you want changed?" "I want her name removed." His eyebrows lifted. "Tara's." Ruth nodded. Thomas set his pen down carefully, giving her the look of someone balancing professionalism with curiosity. "That's a serious revision, Ruth. If I may ask, what prompted this?" Ruth met his gaze evenly. "She treats me like a toddler with memory loss." She let the silence hang before adding softly, "I remember everything." For a moment, Thomas said nothing. The hum of the air conditioner filled the space between them. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. Understood. He opened a new folder. We'll execute an amendment to revoke her beneficiary status. Miles will remain, unless you'd prefer otherwise. Keep Miles, Ruth said, her tone softer now. He's complicated, but he's still my son. Thomas smiled faintly. Understood. And the balance? I want to create a secondary trust, she said, for the Sacramento Literacy Foundation, quietly, anonymous if possible. He nodded, making quick notes. Any specifications on the use? For adult education, night classes, the kind people forget matter. Thomas looked up. That's very you, Ruth. She smiled at that, not sentimentally, but with the satisfaction of purpose finding its shape. And one more thing, she said. I'd like to add Jenna Boyle as my medical proxy and power of attorney. Effective immediately. Thomas's pen paused midair. Not Miles. Ruth shook her head. No. Miles avoids conflict. Power of attorney is conflict. The lawyer gave a small, knowing smile. Jenna will be thrilled. Jenna will be prepared, Ruth corrected. Thomas scribbled the final note, then looked up at her again, eyes thoughtful. You're moving pieces on the board, Ruth. May I ask, is this self-protection or retribution? Ruth's lips curved almost imperceptibly. They're the same thing, depending on who's watching. He leaned back in his chair. You always did have a librarian's way with precision. Librarians understand control, she said. Information, access. As he typed, the steady rhythm of the keys felt like punctuation on her decision. With each click, Ruth felt an old steadiness returning. The quiet dignity of someone reclaiming authorship of her own life. Thomas printed the preliminary paperwork and slid it across the desk. Sign here to begin the revision process. I'll draft the final documents this week. Ruth uncapped her pen. Her handwriting, even now, was meticulous. Small, slanted, composed. She signed without hesitation. When she finished, Thomas looked at her over the edge of his glasses. You know, Ruth, I've seen people disinherit family out of anger, spite, or grief. But you... He paused, studying her expression. You're doing it with remarkable clarity. She smiled faintly. Clarity is what happens when you stop letting other people define your competence. Thomas gathered the papers into a neat stack, tapping them once against the desk. I'll see this through personally. As Ruth stood to leave, he said quietly, You've always remembered everything, haven't you? She glanced back at him. Every password, every promise, every condescension disguised as kindness. Thomas nodded, half admiring. Then I suspect she'll never see this coming. Ruth adjusted her coat, her posture straight, the weight of her decision settling into her bones like steel. That's the idea. Outside, the sunlight was bright, the air crisp. She walked slowly toward the bus stop, her reflection gliding along the glass storefronts. In the distance, her muted phone vibrated inside her purse. She didn't check it. She already knew who it was. By the end of the week, the weather in Sacramento had turned glassy and still, the kind of false calm that makes even the air feel like it's waiting for someone to make the next move. Ruth made hers quietly. At 9 a.m. sharp, she sat across from a polite young banker in a pressed navy suit at the Chase branch downtown. I'd like to open a private trust account, she said, sliding her ID across the desk. The banker smiled, typing briskly. Purpose of the trust? Continuity, Ruth replied. Her voice was steady, clipped, carrying that calm edge that makes people listen twice. Within half an hour, the paperwork was complete. Her savings, once commingled through shared access, were officially moved into an irrevocable trust under her sole authority. When the banker offered her complimentary coffee, she declined. Outside, the sun hit her face as she stepped back onto the sidewalk. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt efficient. Jenna met her later that afternoon at Ruth's kitchen table, laptop open, reading glasses perched on her nose. "All right, sweetheart. Let's make sure every door this woman thought she had a key to is welded shut." Ruth slid over her folder of account summaries. She had viewing access to two. "I want that revoked." Jenna clicked and typed with the confidence of a retired woman who'd wrestled her share of online billing systems. "Done and done. You're flying solo now." Ruth exhaled slowly. "Feels good." Jenna smirked. "Feels earned." They spent an hour cleaning digital footprints, unlinking bank apps, removing Tara's name from joint notifications, and rerouting statements to Ruth's newly created P.O. box downtown. When it was finished, Jenna leaned back in her chair, satisfied. That girl could tear this place apart and still not find a paperclip with her name on it. 2 days later, Ruth found a letter on the kitchen counter. Her name opened, edges slightly torn. She stood perfectly still, her gaze tracing the crease where someone's impatient fingers had pried it open. Tara was in the living room, talking to Miles, her voice too bright. "Oh, I must have thought it was one of ours," she said when Ruth appeared in the doorway. "They all look the same these days. You should really get your mail forwarded." Ruth crossed the room, wordless, and took the envelope. Inside, a checking account statement showing a balance of $200. The decoy account she'd opened for precisely this reason. Tara's smile faltered just slightly as Ruth folded the paper back into the envelope. "No harm done," Tara added quickly. "No," Ruth said softly. "None at all." She turned and walked away, each step deliberate, measured, the same quiet cadence she used when shelving books that didn't belong together. That evening, Ruth packed a small jewelry box. Nothing flashy, just the heirlooms that mattered. Her mother's locket, the gold ring from her 25th anniversary, the charm bracelet Miles had made her in 6th grade. She drove to the downtown Chase again, signed into a safety deposit room, and placed the small box inside. When the vault door sealed, the heavy click reverberated through her chest. Protected, she thought. Finally. Miles came by later that night, hovering in the doorway like a man with too many words and no safe ones to say. "Mom, Tara said there's been banking changes?" Ruth kept her tone light. "Administrative housekeeping." He nodded slowly. "Right. Okay." His eyes lingered on her, the faint tremor of realization that his mother was doing something irreversible, something deliberate. But Miles being Miles, he said nothing. He simply put his hands in his pockets and left the room. Ruth watched him go, a flicker of sorrow crossing her face before it settled back into stillness. Across town, in a newer house filled with glossy surfaces and curated calm, Tara sat at her kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. A call came in from a number she recognized, but rarely wanted to see. State Line Credit and Loan. "Hello?" she answered, voice tight. "Mrs. Ellison? We wanted to confirm a recent change. The co-signer on your business consolidation loan, Ruth Ellison, has withdrawn her support." There was a pause, then a brittle laugh. "That can't be right," she said. "She can't just—" "I'm afraid the revocation is complete," the officer said gently. "Your next payment reflects individual responsibility. It's already processed." Tara's hand trembled as she lowered the phone. Around her, the staged perfection of the kitchen, marble counters, untouched fruit bowl, felt suddenly counterfeit. Back in her modest house, Ruth sat in her reading chair, lamp casting a warm circle around her notebook. She drew a line beneath her last word, proof, and added a new one beneath it in tidy cursive, possession. Outside, wind rustled through the trees, brushing the window like a quiet applause. Her phone buzzed once on the table. A new message from Tara. "Tara, did you just ruin my credit?" Ruth didn't smile this time. She just turned off the lamp, letting the room fall into darkness. By morning, Ruth was awake before sunrise. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. She made her tea the way she always did. Strong, no sugar, steeped just long enough to taste like certainty. On the table beside her sat a folder stamped with Reed and Associates. Inside, Thomas's neatly printed letter confirmed what she already knew. Her name was officially withdrawn as a cosigner from Tara's business consolidation loan. Legal grounds, digital manipulation of the consenting parties' access and records. A perfect phrase, she thought. Cold, factual, impossible to argue with. She set the letter aside and opened her notebook. Beneath possession, she wrote a single new word: detachment. Later that morning, Jenna dropped by with the sharp energy of someone who couldn't wait to be told she'd been right. "You've got that face again," she said, hanging her purse on the chair. "The one you get when you've already detonated something." Ruth poured her a cup of tea. "Just rearranging some paper trails." Jenna grinned. "You revoked that loan, didn't you?" Ruth didn't answer. She didn't need to. The satisfaction in her stillness said enough. They sat at the kitchen table, the two of them surrounded by quiet order, books stacked by the window, sunlight cutting through lace curtains, the faint scent of lemon oil. It looked like any other morning, except for the unspoken pulse beneath it. Something had shifted, permanently. "Thomas said the revocation was airtight," Ruth said finally. "Apparently, when a cosigner proves coercion or digital interference, the bank doesn't ask too many questions." Jenna let out a low whistle. So her fancy credit life just went off a cliff. "Straight down," Ruth said, taking a slow sip of tea. "People don't read what they don't respect." Jenna barked a laugh. "She's going to blow a fuse." Across town, Tara did exactly that. At 9:15 a.m., her phone lit up with one notification after another. Credit alerts, declined auto payments, a sudden drop in her FICO score. Her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator looked pale, even in the morning light. She called the loan office 3 times. The answer didn't change. "Yes, Mrs. Ellison. The withdrawal was executed with full legal verification. No, there's nothing to contest unless the cosigner reauthorizes." By the third call, she was shaking. "She doesn't even understand how any of this works," she snapped. But the truth sat like lead in her chest. Ruth understood it perfectly. That evening, Ruth sat on her porch, cardigan pulled tight against the cooling air. A soft, contented quiet had settled around her. Across the street, Jenna joined her with a mug of cocoa and the latest gossip from the neighborhood. "You realize she's probably tearing her house apart right now?" Jenna said. Ruth smiled faintly, eyes on the dusky sky. "Let her look." They sat in companionable silence until the headlights of Miles's SUV turned into the driveway. "Oh boy," Jenna muttered. "Here comes the fallout." Miles got out first, slow and uncertain. Tara followed, phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. Her heels clicked sharply up the walkway. "Ruth," Tara called, her voice brittle but composed. "We need to talk." Ruth didn't move from her chair. "About what?" Tara held up her phone. "Did you cancel something?" Ruth tilted her head slightly. "I cancel a lot of things lately. Be specific." Tara's composure cracked. "Don't play games with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about. My loan, my credit. You can't just—" Ruth stood, slow and deliberate, the porch light catching the edges of her silver hair. "I can if my name was used without informed consent." For a moment, Tara looked like she might speak again, but her throat tightened around the words. Miles stepped forward, trying to ease the air. "Tara, maybe we should—" But Ruth's calm was sharper than any shout. "Miles, if you've come to collect sympathy, there's none left in stock." He stopped, stunned into silence. Tara's eyes flicked between them, searching for a foothold, for some version of control she still recognized. There was none. Only the quiet authority of the woman she'd underestimated. Ruth turned toward the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have correspondence to read. Paper correspondence. I find it harder for people to update without permission. She stepped inside, leaving the porch light burning. Behind her, Tara exhaled shakily, fury trembling just beneath the surface. From the front window, Ruth watched them retreat to the car. Jenna leaned against the porch rail, muttering, "She's got the look of someone plotting Act Two." Ruth smiled, slow and steady. Then she'll learn something new about sequels. Her burner phone vibrated once in her pocket. A new message. Unknown number. She opened it. "Tara, this isn't over." Ruth typed nothing, just looked out at the fading light. "No," she thought. "It's just beginning." By the time Ruth finished her morning coffee, she'd already decided nothing in this house would be left to chance again. The memory of Tara's shaking voice on the porch, "Did you cancel something?" still lingered like smoke in the walls. It hadn't been fear in that voice. It had been anger. A warning. Ruth had spent a lifetime decoding tone, subtext, motive. Students, colleagues, her own family. She knew the sound of someone plotting a countermove. So she made hers first. At the hardware store on Folsom Boulevard, the cashier helped her load a black steel lockbox into her cart. "Fireproof, tamper-resistant combination entry," the young man said cheerfully. "Fort Knox for your paperwork." Ruth smiled faintly. "Perfect." She brought it home herself, refused the offer of delivery, and set it up in the back of her closet, bolted discreetly into the floor. The rhythmic click of the drill echoed through the quiet house like punctuation. Inside, she arranged her most valuable items with librarian precision. Her burner phone, powered off, wrapped in a soft cloth. The flash drive Allison had helped her encrypt, a second drive labeled simply, "Trust," Thomas Reed's legal correspondence and copies of the will amendments. When she was done, she closed the lid, spun the dial twice, and felt her pulse settle. For the first time in weeks, she felt her space becoming her own again, not just lived in, but defended. Jenna came over that afternoon with her usual mix of humor and surveillance-grade practicality. "You look like a woman who just filed her independence paperwork," she said, peering into the closet. "I needed a system," Ruth replied. "You needed a moat," Jenna countered, holding up a small black box with a blinking red light. "Lucky for you, I brought one." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "A camera?" "Motion activated. Cloud storage. You can see it all from your laptop. We'll put one in the hallway and one facing your front door." Ruth hesitated for only a moment. "Let's do it." They worked in silence. Ruth on a stepladder, Jenna holding cables, the faint scent of dust and lemon polish filling the hall. By the time they finished, two subtle dots of red light watched over the house like sentinels. When Ruth closed her bedroom door that night, the house felt different. Quiet, yes, but not vulnerable. It was a curated kind of silence. Her own design. She slept deeply for the first time in months. The next morning, her equilibrium cracked. Her old phone, the one Tara had secured, now disconnected, was gone. It had been sitting on her dresser for weeks, inert, a piece of evidence she'd meant to hand to Thomas. Now, the space where it had been was empty. No note, no explanation. Ruth stood still for a long time, letting the weight of that realization settle. Then she did what she always did when chaos tried to speak. She wrote. In her notebook, beneath detachment, she added intrusion. And then she called the police. Officer Schultz arrived an hour later, a patient, broad-shouldered man in his 50s with kind eyes that said he'd seen enough domestic accidents to know most weren't accidents at all. "So the phone vanished," he said, jotting notes. "When did you last see it?" "Yesterday morning," Ruth answered. "On the dresser. No one else should have been inside." He nodded, scanning the hallway. You said you installed cameras? Yes. Yesterday afternoon. Smart move. He looked at her, not with pity, but with respect. There's been a pattern of digital overreach cases lately. People using tech to control, to intimidate. Usually start small, passwords, phone plans, and escalates. Ruth met his eyes. It already did. He handed her a card. File numbers on there. We'll pull footage if anything shows up missing again. You've done more than most people do before calling us. When he left, Ruth closed the door gently behind him and leaned against it for a long moment, breathing. That evening, she and Jenna reviewed the first bits of hallway footage. Nothing out of place. Just the hum of ordinary life. Still, Ruth's instincts hummed with quiet tension. You're doing everything right, Jenna said, setting down her mug. Ruth didn't look away from the screen. Right doesn't always mean safe. Jenna reached over and squeezed her hand. Then we'll make it mean safe. Outside, a car door slammed. Both women turned toward the window. Miles's car. But he wasn't the one who stepped out. Tara was alone, standing in the fading light, her phone raised like a weapon she hadn't decided how to use yet. Ruth's camera caught the moment her face lifted toward the house. Calm, smiling, calculated. And Ruth whispered to herself, not in fear, but recognition. She's testing the perimeter. By Thursday morning, the hum of the refrigerator had become a kind of metronome to Ruth, the sound of waiting. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee cooling beside her, the notebook open to its running ledger of words. Invasion, pattern, proof, possession, detachment, intrusion. Each term felt like a chapter heading in a story she hadn't wanted to write, but now refused to stop telling. Her new phone vibrated once, a neutral buzz that drew her eyes to the screen. Chase. Alert. Suspicious login attempt, access blocked. She stared for a long second, pulse ticking behind her ribs. The account listed was the trust she'd just established. Whoever tried it had used a device ID linked to T. Ellison. Ruth didn't move right away. She closed the notification, set the phone down, and reached for her mug instead. Deliberate, slow, calm. She sipped her coffee until it went lukewarm, then opened her laptop and retrieved the footage from the hallway camera. The timestamp matched the alert. 9:41 a.m. Tara on the porch again, phone in hand, the same placid smile. Ruth exhaled. Testing the perimeter, she murmured. She called Officer Schultz before she let herself think about fear. An hour later, he was back, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable but firm. Ruth showed him the footage. He watched quietly, his jaw tightening when Tara lifted her phone toward the door. Same day as the bank's block notice, Ruth said. Coincidence? Schultz asked, already shaking his head. Not likely. He scribbled something. I'll attach this to your report. The footage helps. A lot. Ruth folded her hands in front of her, the motion practiced, almost ceremonial. What happens now? We document, we track. If there's another incident, we can move to a restraining order. Good, Ruth said simply. Schultz nodded once, tipped his cap, and left her standing in the hush that followed. That afternoon, Thomas called. His voice came through crisp and professional, but there was an edge underneath, the sound of a man who'd already begun sharpening paper into weaponry. Ruth, he said, I've reviewed your documentation. You're covered. I assumed as much. I've drafted a letter to Mrs. Tara Ellison, Thomas continued. Cease and desist, digital and financial interference. It cites fraud, coercion, and reputational harm. I'll file copies with the county in case she escalates. Ruth could almost hear the click of the typewriter keys in his voice, that careful legal rhythm. Send it, she said. It'll arrive tomorrow, he said. By certified mail. Make sure she has to sign for it. Thomas paused, maybe to smile. You always did like a paper trail. I believe in records, Ruth replied. By evening, the house had darkened into its usual quiet. Jenna came by again, her hair pulled up, eyes bright with the thrill of being mid-conspiracy. I printed something for you, she said, waving an envelope. Thought you'd like a hard copy for your files. Ruth opened it. Inside, a single sheet, Tara's official loan default notice, the date stamped in red ink like a small, precise wound. Public record, Jenna said. Had to dig a bit, but it's all there. Late payments, missed interest, pending credit flag. Ruth read every line slowly, then folded the paper and slid it into her lockbox file. Good, she said softly. Documentation of consequence. Ruth, Jenna said carefully, you do know she's going to come apart when this all sinks in, right? She already is, Ruth said. That's why she's getting sloppy. They were still in the kitchen when the headlights swept across the window. Miles's SUV again. Ruth's jaw set. Jenna whispered, You want me to stay? Ruth shook her head. No, this part's mine. Miles knocked once before letting himself in, the weight of divided loyalty written all over his face. Mom, he started. What's happening? Ruth looked up from her tea. Be specific. Tara says you're... He faltered, rubbing the back of his neck. You're trying to destroy her. The accounts, the credit, everything. Why are you doing this? Ruth's expression didn't change. I'm not? He blinked. Then what? I already did. Miles's mouth opened, then closed. The sentence landed like glass breaking quietly in the middle of the room. Mom, this isn't you, he said finally. You're better than this? Ruth rose from her chair, her movements slow and precise. No, Miles, I'm just done pretending to be smaller than I am. He took a step back, as if seeing her for the first time, not frail, not cornered, but formidable. I'll tell her to stop coming by, he murmured. Ruth gave a thin, sad smile. That would be the first useful thing you've done in months. He left without another word. The silence that followed was clean, almost antiseptic. Later that night, Ruth reopened her notebook. Beneath intrusion, she wrote confirmation. In the hallway, the camera blinked once, its red light steady, patient. On her phone, a new notification appeared. Certified letter delivered. Recipient signature, T. Ellison. Ruth closed the notebook. Good, she said softly. Outside, in the cul-de-sac, a car idled longer than it should have before driving away. The morning light came in clean and white through the blinds, striping the papers spread across Ruth's dining table. They looked almost clinical laid out like that. No sentiment, just order. She ran a hand along the edges, aligning each page as if she were reshelving books after a long day at the library. At the top of the stack, Last Will and Testament of Ruth M. Ellison. Thomas Reed's careful typeface filled the pages, precise and impersonal. Still, Ruth felt something stir in her chest as she read the final draft. It wasn't grief. It was completion. The clauses were deliberate, almost poetic in their restraint. Miles Ellison, primary beneficiary of the estate's remainder. Tara Ellison, excluded due to digital misconduct and breach of trust. Jenna Boyle, appointed executor and medical proxy. Ruth's pen hovered over the signature line. When she signed, she did so without pause, her handwriting neat and steady. Thomas, seated across from her, watched in silence until the pen left the page. You're certain about this? He asked quietly. Ruth met his gaze. Certainty is all I have left. He nodded once. Then I'll have it filed today. When the papers were notarized and sealed, Thomas slid them into his briefcase with a precision that mirrored Ruth's own. I'll take this straight to the county clerk, he said, You'll get the certified copy by next week. I'd like to record the deed transfer as well, Ruth said, standing. Your home? Yes, into the trust. Thomas blinked, impressed. That'll seal it from claim. No contest. Exactly, she replied. He smiled faintly. You've become one of my most efficient clients. I've had practice. They both laughed, quiet, knowing, and for a brief moment the room felt almost light. As he left, she watched him cross the street to his car, briefcase in hand, the weight of her new life inside it. That evening, Jenna came over with her usual energy and a bag of lemon muffins. She placed them on the counter and noticed the empty folders spread across the table. So it's official? Filed today, Ruth said, closing the binder. And Tara's name is gone. Jenna let out a low whistle. You really did it. I did what needed to be done. Jenna grinned. Remind me to never get on your bad side. You're my executor, Ruth said dryly. You already are my bad side. They both laughed, but it wasn't just humor. It was release. Two women who had spent their lives being underestimated, now writing their own endings. Jenna leaned against the counter, studying her friend. She'll find out soon, you know. These things have a way of surfacing. Ruth nodded, pouring tea into 2 mugs. Let her. Discovery is part of learning. Across town, discovery came with a sting. Tara sat in her living room surrounded by half-open mail and empty wine glasses. Miles stood nearby, uneasy. The certified envelope lay torn on the coffee table, its contents spilling like evidence. She excluded me, Tara said flatly, reading the words again and again. Digital misconduct and breach of trust. She spat the phrase like poison. She's calling me a criminal. Miles rubbed his temple. Maybe just let it go, Tara. Let it go? Her voice cracked, rising. She's rewriting her life to erase me. She's making me look insane. Miles didn't answer. He looked away, shoulders heavy. Tara paced the room, the edge of her phone glinting in her hand. If she wants to play games, fine. I'll play one she can't win. 2 days later, Ruth stood in her front yard trimming roses when the envelope came. The courier stepped out of the car, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Ellison, personal delivery. She signed automatically, then slit the top of the envelope with her gardening shears. Inside, on crisp legal letterhead, Notice of Petition, Probate Division, Sacramento County. Petitioner, Tara Ellison. Subject, Declaration of Mental Unfitness and Guardianship Consideration. Ruth stared at the page for a long moment, her breath catching in her throat. Not in fear, but in disbelief that anyone could twist audacity into paper like that. The roses brushed her arm as a breeze moved through the yard. She folded the document carefully, as if shelving a fragile book. Inside, she placed it on the table, right beside her notebook. Then she wrote one new word beneath the last. Assault. When she closed the cover, her reflection in the window looked back at her. Calm, upright, unbroken. Let her petition, Ruth said aloud. I've already written my testimony. The psychologist's office smelled faintly of sandalwood and copier paper, comfort and bureaucracy sharing the same air. Ruth sat in the waiting area, hands folded neatly over her purse, watching the second hand of the wall clock circle with librarian precision. She'd dressed carefully, charcoal cardigan, pressed slacks, modest earrings. Her composure wasn't armor, it was evidence. A door opened. A woman in her 40s stepped out, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Ellison? Ruth stood. Dr. Raymond? That's right, please come in. The office was softly lit, filled with plants and framed diplomas. A watercolor of a river hung above the couch, its colors deliberate and calm. Dr. Raymond gestured for Ruth to sit. I understand this evaluation was court-recommended? Ruth smiled faintly. Let's call it requested. Dr. Raymond nodded, her tone neutral but kind. We'll do a few standard assessments: memory, reasoning, judgment, and then I'll ask some questions about your daily life. Nothing invasive. I've dealt with more invasive, Ruth replied dryly. The doctor chuckled softly and began. For the next hour, Ruth moved through the tests with quiet precision. She remembered word lists, drew clock faces, balanced numbers backward. When asked to describe a hypothetical emergency, she detailed the evacuation procedure for the library's fire drill system: every exit, every roll, every step. Halfway through, Dr. Raymond lowered her pen. You were a teacher? Librarian, Ruth corrected gently. I taught information literacy, organization, sourcing, discernment. Discernment, the psychologist repeated, almost to herself. By the end of the session, Ruth had not only completed the cognitive evaluation, she had, in her quiet way, taught one. Dr. Raymond leaned back, smiling. Mrs. Ellison, you're sharper than half my graduate students. Ruth allowed herself a small nod. Then I suppose this little exercise is concluded. The psychologist signed the final page of her report. I'll be forwarding this to the county. You have nothing to worry about. I didn't. Ruth stood, smoothing her cardigan. But it's nice to have a second opinion. A week later, Officer Schultz knocked on her door again. Same calm presence, same notepad tucked into his vest pocket. Got something you'll want to see, he said, stepping into the foyer. He held out a folded packet with the county seal. Inside was a summary of the investigation into Tara's petition. The language was measured, bureaucratic, but the meaning was clean and unmistakable. Findings: no evidence of cognitive impairment, petition dismissed. Reporting party cautioned for misuse of elder welfare protocol. Schultz looked up, one eyebrow raised. You're solid as a rock, Mrs. Ellison. Ruth's smile was faint but real. Good, because I'm not done. Schultz chuckled. Didn't figure you were. As he turned to leave, Ruth caught a glint of sympathy in his eyes. Something that wasn't pity but respect. She watched him drive off, the sound of his tires fading into the quiet cul-de-sac. Inside, she set the report on the dining table beside her notebook. Beneath assault, she wrote vindication. A knock came at the side door. Familiar, brisk, 2 quick taps. Thomas. He stepped in, briefcase already open. Got your results, he said. And I've already drafted our next step. Ruth arched an eyebrow. Next step? Defamation, he said simply. Her petition goes on record as public filing. We can respond formally. Nothing aggressive, just a notice that any repetition of those claims will invite civil action. Spoken like a man who enjoys paperwork, Ruth murmured. Thomas smiled. Paperwork is my armor. Then file it, Ruth said. But make sure it's written the way she writes her texts. Short, pointed, impossible to misunderstand. He chuckled. I'll make it precise. When he left, the house was wrapped in late afternoon stillness. The golden light fell across the polished table, the folder of reports, the soft hum of the refrigerator that had become her metronome for months. Ruth moved to the window, gazing out at the quiet street. Across the way, the Ellisons' blinds were drawn. Tara's car sat motionless in the driveway, as though frozen mid-intent. Ruth whispered to the glass, "Run out of passwords yet?" The reflection looking back at her was steady, watchful. That night, she poured herself a small glass of wine, her first in months, and sat by the glow of the lamp, rereading the psychologist's summary. Every sentence reaffirmed what she already knew. Competence wasn't something to prove. It was something to reclaim. She closed the report, placed it carefully in her lockbox, and turned the dial. The satisfying click filled the room. Her new phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number. Tara, congratulations on fooling them. Ruth didn't respond. She just whispered, "You keep underestimating librarians." Then she turned out the light. The morning was brittle and quiet, the kind that seemed to hold its breath before something inevitable. Ruth sat in her reading chair, sunlight spilling across the rug in angled gold. On the table beside her lay a single cream-colored envelope, sealed, unassuming, final. Miles was due any minute. She'd written him the night before, just one line, "Come alone." When he arrived, he didn't knock. He never did. He stood in the doorway, uncertain, his eyes flicking toward the envelope like it was something radioactive. "Mom," he began, voice already cracking at the edges. "I got your message. What's going on?" Ruth motioned to the seat across from her. "Sit down, Miles." He did, awkwardly, knees bumping the coffee table like a boy too big for the room he grew up in. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, but not cruel. Just full. Finally, Ruth said, "You chose comfort over confrontation." Miles looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said, her voice even, "you stood in the middle while someone rewrote my life in front of you. You didn't want to fight, so you let her start one." He winced. "Mom, that's not fair." "Fair," Ruth interrupted, "is a word that belongs in children's books, not marriage." She reached for the envelope and slid it across the table toward him. The paper made a soft whispering sound as it moved. "What is this?" "My new estate plan. You don't need to read it now." He hesitated. "Is it?" "It's what it needs to be." He didn't open it. Instead, his hands closed around it like something fragile, and for a long moment he just stared down at the sealed flap. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," he said quietly. "I know." "I thought keeping the peace was helping." Ruth looked at him with something close to tenderness. "Peace built on silence never lasts." Miles blinked rapidly, shoulders shaking just slightly. "She's not herself anymore. Or maybe she is, and I just didn't want to see it." Ruth stood, walked around the coffee table, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're my son, Miles. That doesn't mean I'll save you from your choices." He nodded, the smallest motion, and for the first time in years, tears filled his eyes. They didn't fall dramatically, just quietly, the way regret always did. When he finally left, Ruth watched him go from the window, the envelope still clutched in his hand. She didn't wave. She just whispered, "Now you know what real accountability feels like." 2 weeks later, the world around her seemed lighter. The lawsuit, the petitions, the endless paperwork, all of it had thinned into background noise. That Saturday, Ruth stood at the entrance of the downtown community center, the faint buzz of conversation spilling out into the evening air. Banners hung across the hall. Sacramento Literacy Foundation, celebrating lifelong learners. Her name was on the program. The Ellison Adult Reading Grant. Inside, round tables shimmered under soft string lights. She spotted Jenna near the buffet, dressed in a sequined jacket that caught every color in the room. "Would you look at this?" Jenna said, clinking her glass against Ruth's. "A charity wing named after you, a scholarship fund in your name, and lemon bars that don't taste like sawdust. Retirement's treating you fine." Ruth smiled. "It's treating me honestly." Midway through the evening, one of the foundation directors called her to the podium. The applause felt distant, not overwhelming, just warm, earned. She spoke briefly, steady and composed. "Libraries taught me that control isn't about keeping everything. It's about knowing what to let go of and what to protect." The audience nodded, some smiling, some tearing up. When she stepped down, Jenna hugged her tight, whispering, "For writing her own ending." Ruth squeezed her friend's hand. For editing along the way. Later that night, back home, a small white envelope waited in her mailbox. No return address. Inside was a short handwritten note on notebook paper. Mrs. Ellison, I got the reading grant you started. I'm the first in my family to go to college. Thank you for believing that people can still change their story. Erica M. Ruth folded the letter slowly, tracing the words with her fingertips. Outside, the neighborhood was still. Across the street, the Ellisons' house stood dark. No lights, no sound, no sign of movement. For the first time in months, Ruth didn't feel like she was defending something. She felt like she'd already won. She poured herself one last glass of wine, then opened her notebook and added a single word beneath the last: legacy. The night was quiet, but alive, and somewhere in that stillness, her resolve deepened again, proof that closure wasn't surrender. It was continuation. The first alert came on a Tuesday morning, barely a flicker on Ruth's phone screen, a small blue notification she might have missed if she hadn't been cataloging everything by instinct. Chase. Fraud alert. Unauthorized attempt detected. Then another. Vanguard account, password recovery request blocked. And then a third. Linked user. T. Ellison. Access denied. Ruth stared at the series of messages, her pulse steady but her eyes sharpening with something that wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. Tara wasn't done testing boundaries. She was clawing at what she could no longer touch. Ruth opened her notebook and turned to a fresh page. Across the top, she wrote one new word in careful ink: exposure. By noon, she was at Thomas Reed's office, the same folder she'd carried through every stage of this quiet war clutched under her arm. Thomas looked up as she entered, reading her face before she spoke. Another incident? 3. Ruth replied, setting the phone and printed alerts on his desk. Bank. Investment. Mutual fund. Same digital signature. Same name. He put on his glasses, flipping through the documents. She's trying to recover account access through back-end requests. These timestamps? He tapped one. That's deliberate. She's timing them during your off hours. She's consistent, Ruth said dryly. Thomas smiled grimly. Then we'll be consistent too. He opened a new legal folder and began typing. I'll file for a permanent asset protection order. It's an extension of your elder protection claim. Once it's approved, she won't be able to challenge a single financial institution under your name. Ruth folded her hands neatly in her lap. Good. Let's close every door she left ajar. That evening, Jenna arrived with a takeout bag and her trademark blunt cheer. Tell me you've at least eaten something other than moral superiority today. Ruth smiled faintly. Thomas is filing the papers. About time. You've practically turned your life into a courtroom exhibit. Jenna unpacked the food. Still, it's kind of poetic. She spent all this time managing you, and now you've got her firewalled. Ruth chuckled quietly. She tried to curate my life. I prefer to archive hers. They ate in companionable silence, the hum of the refrigerator and the soft buzz of Ruth's phone filling the pauses. When she checked it again, she saw another alert. Unauthorized login attempt. Terminated. Jenna noticed her expression. Another? Yes, Ruth said calmly. And the last one that'll matter. Across town, Tara's fury was volcanic. She slammed her laptop shut so hard a picture frame on the wall tilted. They locked everything, she hissed. Every account I tried, even the old ones. Miles sat at the dining table, silent, his eyes hollow. Maybe it's time to stop, Tara. Stop? She turned on him, shaking. They're my accounts, too. We built this life together. She's sabotaging us from that little mausoleum of hers. She's protecting what's hers, Miles said quietly. Tara's voice rose, sharp and raw. This is your mother's fault. He didn't look up, didn't flinch. Didn't argue. Just stared at the blank table like he was finally seeing the cost of every time he'd chosen silence over truth. The quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was surrender. By Friday, the paperwork was complete. Thomas called Ruth from the courthouse parking lot. Filed and approved. The restraining order on all asset manipulation is permanent. She's officially walled out. Ruth exhaled through her nose, calm and measured. Thank you, Thomas. You've built something stronger than revenge, he said. You've built security. She smiled faintly. Security was always the point. After the call, she went to her bedroom closet and opened the lockbox one last time. Inside, the velvet pouch of heirloom jewelry glimmered softly in the light. Her mother's locket, the anniversary ring, the bracelet Miles had made as a boy. She held each piece for a moment, letting memory pass through her fingers like air. Then she zipped the pouch shut. That afternoon, she visited the downtown donation office for the Sacramento Women's Resource Center. She didn't give her name. She simply handed the clerk the envelope and said, "For the silent ones who need a start." When she stepped back outside, the sunlight hit her face, clean and unburdened. That night, she wrote a single new word in her notebook: release. As she capped her pen, headlights swept across her window, then paused. Not Miles's SUV this time. She moved to the curtain, parting it just enough to see a car idling across the street. The silhouette behind the wheel was unmistakable. Tara. Ruth's phone vibrated once on the table. Tara. You think this ends with paperwork? Ruth didn't reply. She simply reached over, unplugged the lamp, and let the room fall into deliberate darkness. Ruth Ellison had never been one for paranoia, only precision. Still, by the next morning, she knew instinct wasn't enough anymore. Tara's car had idled too long, her text too pointed. So she did what she'd always done when chaos came knocking. She turned it into data. The technician from a local security company arrived by 9. Whole perimeter, Ruth told him. Inside and out. I want it comprehensive. He whistled softly when he saw the layout. You want the smart package? Cloud backup? Night vision? Motion alerts? Yes, Ruth said, but no mobile sync. He blinked. No app access? She met his eyes, steady. If it's on a phone, it's vulnerable. He didn't argue. By the time the sun dipped west, small white cameras crowned the edges of her eaves, tiny glass eyes angled toward the world. Ruth tested each feed from her laptop, the crisp grayscale images of her yard, porch, and mailbox coming into view. Order made visible. The next morning, she brewed coffee and opened the live feed. The street looked quiet, dew on the lawns, a jogger passing by, a delivery truck coasting down the cul-de-sac. Then, at 9:17 a.m., movement near the curb. Tara. She was wearing sunglasses, her hair pulled back tight, her posture too calm. She walked up the driveway, glanced toward the window, and slipped a white envelope into Ruth's mailbox. Then she walked back to her car and drove off. No hesitation, no hurry. Ruth didn't touch the envelope. She took a photograph of it from every angle, then called Officer Schultz. He arrived within the hour, his cruiser idling in the same spot Tara's car had been. Let me guess, he said, looking at the footage she'd queued up. She thinks this is subtle. I'm guessing intimidation wasn't subtle enough, Ruth replied. He retrieved the envelope using gloves. It was empty. No writing, no return address, just a blank sheet inside. Message is clear, Schultz said. She's testing response time. Ruth's expression didn't change. Then let's give her a record of it. Schultz nodded, sliding the evidence into a plastic sleeve. You've got enough on file now that if she so much as walks past your fence line again, we'll fast-track a restraining order. One more act, Mrs. Ellison. Just one. Ruth nodded once. Understood. He lingered a moment, lowering his voice. I've seen people go through worse with less grace. You're doing everything right. Ruth gave a small smile. Right doesn't mean kind. He tipped his cap. No, ma'am, it means smart. Later that afternoon, Jenna arrived, 2 cups of coffee in hand, scanning the footage again on Ruth's laptop. You know what this is, right? She said. She thinks this is about money. Ruth's tone was calm, almost tender. It's about boundaries. Jenna leaned back, sighing. You always did draw straight lines. And she always stepped over them. Ruth turned the screen off. But that's the difference. I document. She reacts. I archive. She erases. Jenna grinned faintly. You're scarier than you realize. 2 days later, Thomas called. Ruth, he said without preamble, I've filed the final notice of exclusion. The county approved it. She's officially and legally separated from all estate records, assets, and trusts. Permanently. Ruth felt the words settle like a weight lifted off her chest. Thank you, Thomas. There's more, he said, voice tightening with a lawyer's restrained satisfaction. Something surfaced this morning through the licensing board. You should hear it from me before it makes the papers. Ruth's pulse ticked once. Go on? Tara's real estate license has been suspended, pending investigation for unethical financial conduct. Misrepresentation of cosigner credit and falsified disclosures. Ruth was silent for a long moment. Outside, a wind chime clinked softly, rhythmic and eerie against the still air. She'll blame me, Ruth said finally. Thomas sighed. She can't. The record speaks louder. Records always do, Ruth murmured. That's why I keep them. That evening, Ruth walked down the driveway and opened her mailbox. Empty now, cleared, silent. She closed the metal door slowly, letting the sound echo down the quiet street. Across the way, the Ellison house sat dark except for one upstairs light. Curtains twitched. Inside, Ruth poured herself tea, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. She sat at her desk, flipped open her notebook, and wrote the next word in the chain. Containment. For the first time in months, she felt like every loose thread was tied. And yet, something in her chest refused to settle, because control, she'd learned, never ended neatly. It just shifted shape. Her phone buzzed against the desk. She expected a message from Jenna or Thomas, but it wasn't a text at all. It was a notification from the security feed. Motion detected. Front porch. Ruth clicked the alert. The grayscale video loaded slowly, grainy in the nightlight. A single figure stood at the edge of the porch, motionless. Then, the camera refocused. Just in time for Ruth to see, it wasn't Tara this time. It was Miles, his face pale, drawn, his hands empty. He stared at the door for several seconds, then turned away, disappearing into the shadows of the street. Ruth leaned back in her chair, eyes still on the frozen frame. Lines, she whispered. Everyone crosses theirs eventually. The envelope from the Sacramento Literacy Foundation arrived on a Monday morning, cream paper with gold trim, her name written in looping script that looked almost too young for such official stationery. Ruth turned it over once before opening it. Old habit, as if checking a book spine before committing to the story inside. The letter was simple, almost shy in tone. Dear Mrs. Ellison, we're proud to announce the opening of the Ellison Reading Wing, dedicated to empowering adult learners throughout the county. Your contribution made this possible. We'd love for you to attend the ribbon cutting next month. With gratitude, the Sacramento Literacy Foundation. Ruth read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it beside her teacup. For a long moment she simply looked at it, the quiet acknowledgement of a life redefined. Not victory, not revenge, just restoration. Outside, the cul-de-sac was bathed in that bright mid-morning calm only suburbia could fake. Lawns manicured, driveways empty, no trace of the storm that had once ripped through these tidy houses. By 10, Jenna was at the door, windblown, half late, balancing a box of scones and the morning paper. "Guess who made the front page of the Community Digest?" she said, dropping both onto the table. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "If it's another local bake sale, I'm leaving." Jenna grinned, tapping the headline, "Local Librarians Legacy Fund's Literacy Wing." A photo took up half the space, Ruth shaking hands with a board member at the foundation event weeks earlier, unaware the picture had been taken. Her smile in the image was small, measured, but undeniably at ease. "Well," Jenna said, tearing a scone in half, "there you are, Sacramento's quiet hero." Ruth shook her head. "Heroes act on impulse. I acted on documentation." "Semantics," Jenna said, mouth full. "Still, you finally got your piece and your byline." Ruth glanced toward the window. "Peace is quiet. I'm still adjusting to the quiet." "Speaking of quiet," Jenna said, lowering her voice, "Thomas told me Tara and Miles packed up, moved last week. Oregon, supposedly." Ruth didn't flinch. "I expected as much. You don't sound surprised." "Surprise," Ruth said evenly, "is for people who stop paying attention." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, broken only by the scrape of forks against china and the faint hum of Ruth's refrigerator. The normalcy of it all felt like a luxury she'd finally earned. That afternoon, Ruth drove downtown to the library, a building she hadn't entered since the day she retired. The automatic doors opened with a soft whoosh, welcoming her back into the familiar smell of old paper, air conditioning, and quiet concentration. At the front desk, Allison Chen looked up and smiled. "Well, if it isn't the woman of the hour?" Ruth laughed. "You read that silly article." "I printed it for the staff room. You're our patron saint of persistence now." Ruth waved her off. "Don't canonize me yet. I came with paperwork." Allison blinked. "Paperwork?" "My medical proxy update," Ruth said, pulling a neatly folded envelope from her purse. "I'm naming you this time. Jenna's executor. Your proxy. Fair division of duties." Allison looked surprised. "Me? That's... Ruth. That's an honor." "It's practicality," Ruth said, "and librarians understand privacy better than anyone." Allison smiled softly. "I'll make sure it's filed properly." "I knew you would." An hour later, Ruth stood in a small meeting room at the back of the library, a whiteboard behind her, half a dozen seniors seated in folding chairs. On the board, written in her tidy script, "Digital Safety 101, How to Spot a Scam." She clicked the remote. A slide appeared on the projector. "If they claim to protect you, ask what they want to access." "Never give permission you don't understand," she told them, her tone gentle but firm. "The people who say they're keeping you safe are often the ones who want control." A few nodded. One woman raised her hand timidly. "Did that happen to you?" Ruth smiled. "Something like that. But I learned. And so will you." At the back, Jenna slipped quietly into a seat, watching her with a small, knowing grin. When the session ended, she walked up to the podium. "You realize you're doing it again, right?" Jenna said. "Doing what?" "Teaching." Ruth chuckled, stacking her notes. "Retired librarian. Still educating. Poetic justice, don't you think?" Ruth glanced toward the students chatting as they packed up. "No," she said softly. "Just good cataloging." That night, she sat at her desk, the letter from the foundation now framed beside her lamp. Outside, the street was silent. No cars idling, no envelopes in mailboxes, no shadows crossing her porch. For the first time in years, she didn't need to look over her shoulder. She opened her notebook one last time and wrote the next word beneath, containment peace. Then, after a pause, she added another. Earned. As she capped her pen, her phone buzzed. A new message from Thomas. County confirmation. All final orders upheld. Case officially closed. Ruth read it twice, then turned off her phone. In the reflection of the dark window, her face looked lighter. Older, yes, but unconquered. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room again, steady and reassuring, like the last sentence of a long book finally finding its period. Outside, wind brushed through the cul-de-sac, rustling the leaves. Ruth listened and smiled. It wasn't silence anymore. It was peace, making itself known. The morning came soft and slow, spilling sunlight across the lace curtains like honey. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It had texture, warmth, an ordinary rhythm she'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Ruth woke without the jolt of vigilance, no half-formed thought of what might have changed overnight. The house greeted her like a well-behaved memory, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint scent of lavender from last night's candle, the tick of the wall clock she'd never once had to reset. Everything was exactly where she left it. She padded barefoot into the reading room and opened the blinds. Outside, the cul-de-sac shimmered in early light, the mailboxes lined like punctuation marks on a sentence that had finally ended. The house across the street was still for sale, its windows vacant. The car that used to idle too long was gone. Ruth struck a match and lit the small candle on her desk, the same one she used to keep burning during late grading nights at the library. Its scent filled the room, something floral but faint, grounding. Beside it lay a single folder. She opened it and began to read. Estate Summary of Ruth M. Ellison. Filed, Sacramento County Clerk's Office. Beneficiaries, Miles Ellison. Primary partial. Executor, Jenna Boyle. Proxy, Allison Chen. Contingent assets secured in Ellison Literacy Trust. Clean, protected, final. She ran her finger along the typed lines as if they were braille, each word a confirmation that the storm was truly over. The will was more than a document. It was an act of authorship, a closing chapter no one else could edit. She smiled faintly, then folded the folder closed, pressing her palm flat against it in quiet satisfaction. In the kitchen, she boiled water and spooned loose-leaf tea into her favorite mug, chipped on one edge but still serviceable. As the kettle hissed, she opened her laptop. One more thing. She navigated to her password manager, entered her master key, and methodically reset every credential she owned. Email, utilities, streaming accounts, even the library login. The ritual was less about necessity and more about affirmation. A librarian's instinct for order carried to the last detail. When the screen finally flashed, all passwords updated, she closed the laptop and exhaled. A long, steady breath that seemed to empty months of residue from her chest. Her notebook sat nearby. She flipped to the final page where she'd written, peace, earned, and added one last word beneath it, security. Then she closed it, the sound small but decisive. Late morning brought Jenna, as it often did, knocking twice, and entering without waiting. She carried a cardboard box, the kind used for mailers, and a grin that reached her eyes. "Brought you something, Ms. Celebrity Donor," Jenna said, setting it down on the table. Ruth eyed it warily. "If it's another plaque, I'll use it as a coaster." "Better," Jenna said, peeling the tape. Inside was a stack of newsletters from the Sacramento Literacy Foundation. The front page showed a color photo of Ruth, seated in her reading chair at the ribbon cutting mid-laugh. The caption read, "Ellison Reading Wing opens doors for adult learners." Ruth laughed softly. "They caught me smiling. That's rare." "You look peaceful," Jenna said, "like someone who finally cataloged the universe." Ruth smirked. "Just my corner of it." Jenna sat, stealing a scone from the counter. "You know, for someone who never wanted attention, You've ended up with quite the paper trail. Ruth poured 2 cups of tea, passing one over. Documentation is how history survives. And revenge? Ruth's eyes softened. Revenge doesn't survive. It resolves. Jenna raised her cup. To resolution. To record keeping, Ruth said, smiling. They clinked their cups together, the sound light and delicate, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. By afternoon, the house was bathed in gold. Ruth walked slowly through each room, the living room with its neat rows of books, the hallway lined with framed photos, the study where the lockbox sat closed and silent. She paused at the front door and looked out again. The neighborhood seemed impossibly calm. No watchers, no idle cars, no tension strung between windows. Only sunlight and the faint hum of sprinklers in the distance. For years, she'd mistaken control for confinement. Now, standing in the open doorway of a house that was wholly hers, she understood the difference. Security wasn't about walls or passwords. It was about authorship, the right to write your own ending, unchallenged, unedited, unquestioned. Ruth turned back toward her reading room, tea still warm on the desk, the candle burning low. She sat, picked up the newsletter again, and looked at her photo one last time. The woman in the picture didn't look victorious. She looked free. The afternoon light shifted across the room, softening everything it touched. Ruth leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, and smiled. She changed my phone for safety, she said quietly, almost to herself. So I changed the will for security.